Hello, everyone. Today I have with me Brian Callanan. Brian Callanan is the international best-selling author of Don't Get Bullied by Your Bank. He prepares businesses to go to market, business exit strategies. And for those in the know, Brian is an answered prayer. So Brian, how about a little bit of information about yourself, your background, and how you came about to writing your book and what you do for business people to help them prepare to exit their business.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you for having me. I've been looking forward to this, so I appreciate the invitation to come aboard here. I love how you teed that up as an answered prayer, because I will share with you that this was totally a God thing for me. It came by way of my background in private wealth management in Palm Beach. And as families came to us after having sold their businesses, we had a mandate where if they were opening an account of $5 million or larger, they came to us. What I came to see over and over and over again with these families was, in spite of how much money they had, they often discovered in our process that they did not have very good pre-planning prior to exiting. So they didn't often know what their business was worth. They didn't really look at what they were spending annually, and they had no idea as to what their sell price needed to be when you modeled that over 30, 35 years, took into consideration taxes and cost of living adjustments, and then a reasonable rate of return. They'd look at what they were going to make annually, and the shock on their faces over and over and over again was that they were not going to be able to live on that. And so I wanted to know where downstream was this problem. And so my concern, what primarily kicked this off, was my concern for the women. In my home, I saw what good planning and bad planning looked like, with my couple of grandmothers and an aunt. And my concern at the time was long-term care. And so I came home for COVID, was convicted, felt spirit-led, and it was like, honestly, this is my story. It was God saying to me, Brian, write the book now. And I was like, really? He's like, yes. Do you trust me? Yes, Lord. And so I sat and wrote the book. The book was going to be titled Women, Widows, and Wealth, because I was concerned for the women, as I often would talk about people living to be 90, 95, or 100. I'd be in front of a crowded room and say, ladies and gentlemen, I have good news and bad news. You're going to live to be 90, 95, or 100. Gentlemen, bad news, as I tap my cigar, right? You're going to go first. What's the plan to take care of the caretakers when the caretakers can no longer take care of themselves? And there was abject silence because people aren't planning for it. So that's what kicked off my writing the book.
Excellent. So as far as a business exit strategy goes, when do you feel businesses should start thinking about their exit strategy?
You're going to love this. The minute they decide they want to start a business.
There you go.
So upon which time they start the business, what we teach in the value acceleration methodology are principles along the way where, when one's building the business, if they put these cornerstones in place and these foundational pieces in place, it helps them run a better business. So if I come to the table early, I could be teaching them this stuff, as well as if I come to the table later, we're going to go back and reverse engineer and see what they have that's missing. All along, the process is the same, and we'll bring them to a point where they come to a fork in the road, where they choose to scale and continue to grow, or they exit the business. So when I was talking about what they're going to retire with, and when we model the numbers and what they're going to need to retire on financially, etc., sometimes we reach a point where, number one, they don't even know what their business is worth, where we can start doing the math. Once we help them figure out what it's worth, then we need to secure that value. And then once we start to plan on them selling the business, we need to know what their top line is going to be, what the multiple in their industry is going to be, that's going to get them and net them the kinds of dollars at a high level that will then be invested, that will get them a return, that will kick them a number that they need annually to live on. Sometimes when they think they want to sell the business, what we find out is now's not the time to sell if you can help it. You may need to do an acquisition first. So we come to you and say, we have a business here that is doing X, Y, and Z. They need to really raise their top line so that they can reach this number, so that they can have this net number that then effectuates what their annual number will be to live through those next 35 years. So it may be even we find out that they may need to do an acquisition or two to really position them where they want to be when they do exit. So there's so much work that goes into this, and it's people like you who I love to take the time to find out, okay, what seems to be missing. And so here's what the process typically looks like. Who do they count on? They'll often go to their lawyer. And I'll often say, a lawyer, when I put them between a wall and a sword, will agree. They get paid to transfer assets, this asset from one party to another. If one party tries to take it from them, they'll go defend the ownership of that asset. And that's what they do. They don't have, frankly, the right to be talking about value. It's not their lane. So who do you go to? You go to the CPA. What's a CPA do? They're tax specialists. They're going to look at your income statements and your balance sheet, and they're going to position all of those numbers in documentation for your tax return, make it look like you made as little as possible so you pay as little in taxes as possible as the strategy. That tax number is not the number you're going to take out to market to say, this is what my business is worth. Okay, so then where do they go? The insurance crowd is going to, do the risk analysis. They don't know the value of the business. Or the financial advisors. They don't know value either. Those guys are glorified. I am one. I'm a recovering financial advisor. I've got as many or more licenses and designations than most I've ever sat with because of the environment from which I came. These guys want the assets after the close, but they don't understand the value of this person's business, irrespective of the industry it's in. So what I've discovered during my journey was finding M&A specialists who do understand value. And while becoming a certified exit planning advisor, I became one of 3,000 people with this training, coming from an environment where I was one of 625,000 financial advisors. And I was like, here's the missing piece. It was like light dawned on Marblehead, and I really saw what was missing. So that's the mission I've been on, is trying to help people understand the process and understanding first, here's how we do evaluation. This is what it's worth. Now here's how we protect it. Once we know what it's worth, we do the math, we model it out, we help them see what that number is going to be. And if there's going to be a wealth gap or a value gap to get them to that number, now it might require an acquisition that you could run, or some other augmentation of the industry. And another key important point here too is most of these people are hard pressed to find out that their businesses have no value. And they'll say, I'm making all kinds of money. What do you mean my business has no value? When an investor comes to buy their business, they don't want to buy their job. So some of these people, one of the most poignant questions I ask is, when's the last vacation you took? And what's the last longest vacation you've taken? And some people wear it like a badge of courage. And they're like, I haven't had a vacation in 5 years. That's not a good thing. Your business has no value. And so we teach them things that they're not learning from these other professionals, all of whom have a role at the table. And when we call certain plays, it's their move to make as we do those things. But it's really been eye-opening to find out how underserved the business owners are. And part of what spoke to me in that is the sacrifices these business owners have made to build their businesses and have them be successful, missing ball games, missing anniversaries, missing Valentine's Day, whatever it may be, to be out building their business. And so I have a heart for these people, wanting their last deal to be something that is successful for them, and not only the people who are getting fees at the table to win. And that's what's driving me right now.
Well, that's a good point, Brian. I've done a lot of resales myself as well, helping businesses sell themselves. And there's a lot of little different pieces to it. You can get evaluation, you get your CPA, get your attorneys. But when it comes right down to it, each one of the business owners had to come up with a value on their own and do all that on their own, because there was not one person that I found that would do that for them. You could get a valuation on your business, but it doesn't take into all the things that you now taken into. The valuation doesn't say when was the last time you took a vacation. So it's a good point. But you go even beyond that. So you have things like estate planning strategies as well, from what I understand.
Absolutely. And to that point, the first thing we do once we've identified the value. So what do we identify the value based on? There's 6 value drivers that drive the value. To your point, some of it is what's the tenure of your management? Again, how long have you been able to walk away from the business where it can continue to run on itself? What markets do you have? Do you have, any concentration risk with your customers? If you've got 1 or 2 huge clients, it represents 10% or more of your business. That's not a good thing either, because if there's some kind of a regime change and you lose all of that revenue, what's that going to do to your business? So there's all kinds of poignant questions we put them through. We come up with a valuation predicated on those 6 value drivers that are not on the income statement or the balance sheet. And then we come up with 3 recommendations for each of the value drivers. And then we would work to help them implement those things. We put points associated to them so they know which ones to take as priorities and how it'll impact the value of the business and the multiple. We give them a feel for what the business is worth today, what the business could be worth by implementing these things. And we have enough data now to know that the difference between someone not going through our process and someone going through our process, it has an additional 40% value to the business.
That's incredible. That's a huge value, because a lot of times some businesses will ask me, what do I think it's worth? I'm like, well, I'm not really an expert on the business and I don't do valuations, but coming back with something like that, just a little bit of work with you to get 40% more, my people would just jump at that. Definitely. So how long does it usually take to go through that process and get that done?
Well, it doesn't have to be long. And I like to walk people through a process that, I came to learn, which is this. It starts with number 1, the business owners are often not problem aware. They do not know the process they're about to step into. So what I like to do is begin to educate them as to the statistics. So here's a statistic, and this is one of the things that really rocked me and turned me 180 degree, and I'm going in a different direction than my contemporaries, frankly. And that is 80% of the people who seek to sell their business will never find a buyer. Of the 20%, 80% of the people will never find a buyer that seek to sell their business. Of the 20% that do, when surveyed 1 year later, 75% of them profoundly regret the experience. And this was from surveying business owners with PwC, Exit Planning Institute, and the American Association of Mergers and Acquisitions. So that's a net 5% of the people get the number they want and live happily ever after with this. And so when I heard that, again, it broke my heart, because I just have had a heart for these families who've gone and built businesses. I didn't come from a family of entrepreneurs. My father worked for the power company and spent 38 years with the power company, doing different things within that company. And my mom was a school nurse. Otherwise, kind of the family that I was closest to were either teachers or laborers. So when I saw what I was seeing as I kind of went through the financial services ranks, I just was incredibly impressed with these families and what they were able to accomplish. But to hear their stories and the sacrifice had me really drawn to them. And I think that's the historian in me. But I'd hear these family stories and it's like, okay, I'd start to look around. If I may, for a shameless plug, I'd look around and start to say, who has these people's back? And I began getting a chip on my shoulder. And so as I began to find out what was getting me so jacked up, and it was through my own upbringing with my family. We had a rough experience with my dad. I was the oldest. He was raised by an alcoholic, abusive alcoholic, actually. And it was kind of rough. I'll spare you the details there. We're good. We're best of friends today. But I went to him and he said, Dad, I'd like to tell our story, because I think if I told our story, I'm 17 years sober, just about. And I said, I think we could help families bridge a gap that's not too far by going through the forgiveness and the work that needed to be done. So the book went from what was going to be Women, Widows, and Wealth to Don't Get Bullied by Your Bank or Anyone Else, which is really more my story, right? The part that speaks to the business owner is the 5-step plan to exit your business with all the money you need to live the life you want. And so in there, I began to teach, if I may, right here. my shameless plug. I began to teach the things that I saw not being taught by financial advisors. And I began to teach them the industry and how these guys are measured by assets under management. And the more of those assets in the market, the better they get paid. So it's counterintuitive to expect them, as they're measuring themselves, who has a bigger pile of AUM? Do they have millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars, or billions of dollars, right? The idea of them making a withdrawal of those dollars to then invest in life insurance, long-term care, disability insurance, or an annuity, which is the safer side of the equation, it's counterintuitive. They don't do it 99 times out of 100. Let's say, I'll be generous and say 95 times out of 100, actually. So when I saw that, I felt compelled, I felt called to share this information and put it out there. And then as I began to study more deeply and research, that's when I started really seeing the exit planning as the breakdown further downstream, as it was the planning and strategic planning problem. And so if we could fix these things on the front end and make for a better back end, I know the people that I'm producing that are going to be going out to those same private wealth management offices are going to be much better situated than had they not gone through this process. And so that's what's lit me up, and I've had a tremendous amount of passion for it, because I know, I can make a difference. I know this process makes a difference, and I know their families will be better for it.
Yes, definitely. So I know a lot of my folks could definitely use that information, especially when they're first starting out in business. Because one of the things I ask them, what is your exit strategy? What is your long-term plan? You're just going to keep it forever and do something, but have an exit strategy. Always do that. And you go even beyond that. So you do estate planning strategies, you do wealth management, asset preservation, and you've got retirement income strategies. And that's just a few of the many things that you help people with along the way, building them up. So when somebody works with you, how long is a typical process? Do they just stay with you throughout the entire time they have the business, or is there a particular time frame that you can set them up for? Or you just come in every once in a while and work with them?
It really depends on where they are. So one of the analogies I use when I'm presenting, and I raised my son in the Boy Scouts, in the Boy Scout platform. And we did a high adventure program where we went out I spent 2 weeks on the trail with him. We did 85 miles and topped a 12,500 foot mountain. He stayed for 30 days, did 165 miles and topped that same mountain twice. And so there are times when you're out there that you're lost, like literally. You do not know where you are. So how do we figure it out? You have to shoot a bearing based on the mountain peaks that you have visibility to, and then with your compass and a map, figure it out. Once you figure out where you are, that's what's going to drive what you do next. So I often start with, where are you? So that's why I start with the problem aware type questions. I then can do 3 assessments with them, where generally, if it's partners, brothers, husband and wife, whatever the case might be, what is their plan? And we ask a series of poignant questions that are mapped to a scoring system that will help them quantify where they are. And then we'll say, okay, well, here's what's the business, and we'll assess the business with a series of poignant questions that ask the right questions so they can score that to a map and say, okay, and they'll see some things and it'll start to click, like, and then we'll do another assessment, which will be, how attractive will the business be to a buyer? And we start asking all the right questions there. And all of a sudden they start to say, there's more to this than I thought, because a lot of them think it's as simple as selling a house. Put a sign in the front lawn, someone comes and buys it, I get my number, I live happily ever, and God bless America. And as I said in that previous statistic, 80% of them never find a buyer. So these businesses just unwind.
Wow.
And that concerns me. They say the greatest risk on Wall Street is longevity. Nobody's talking about modern healthcare is keeping us alive a lot longer than we've otherwise had to plan for in the past.
True. That is very true. So as soon as they get into a business, they need to contact you and say, this is my business, this is where I want to go. And then you're going to come up with a strategy for them. Halfway through, if they've got a business right now, if anybody out there's got a business right now, they should probably just contact you to see, so they know where they're at, where do they want to be 2 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now. But if you come in thinking that you're going to sell your business like next week, that's probably not realistic. They need to sit down with you first to make certain that they are where they should be and not try and sell it too quick until they know that they're going to get what they want out of it. Is that about right?
Well, I don't want that to sound like it's all about me, but they certainly want to do some homework, because when we do, like, we have a seller's survey I share with people when they look to see how few have actually done any education on this subject, and how on one hand they'll say how important it is to be educated on an exit strategy, and how few of them have ever done any education on it, or how few of them actually have a team. This is not going to be put together by your the buddy you fish with, and the other guy you golf with, and the other guy you go drinking with, or whatever. This is a specialization that requires, people who understand this space and are going to be thoughtful enough to take you through a process that, as I said, it starts with the family first. What have we done in the business? And these cards need to be played in a methodology that doesn't spook the customers, doesn't spook the employees, doesn't spook the vendors, because what you've put together there, it's a lot of moving parts. And you don't want, again, in one of my slides, I use a 3-legged stool, and this needs to be done with a balance that doesn't have this thing topple over. And to your point, one wants to be ready to sell their business at any time. Why? Because more often than not, the sale of that business is somewhat thrust upon the seller. Why so? We call it the 5 Ds: divorce, disability, death, disagreement with partners, or distress in the industry, in your particular business, right? So if something happens, you want to be prepared to sell. Well, that's what these steps were I talked about earlier from the person who's building from day one. We want to have all of the processes, procedures, documentation, training. People can say, well, we're number one at this. Okay, prove it. And you're going to have to prove certain things about your special sauce to the buyer who you expect to pitch the keys to and walk away from. And that stuff is often not there. And what will happen is, if you go to market prematurely and you begin to open up the kimono a little, prior to which time you've done an exhaustive study, you're going to see the value meter start to tick down, not in your favor. So, much like selling a home, I mean, I'm a realtor and mortgage broker as well, so I kind of can speak to this. I just worked on a project where I said to the business owner, because this was a significant home, it was about 15 million bucks. We want to get an appraisal first, so we know what they say this thing is worth, and we want to have an inspection done immediately. So prior to which time we brought people in, we knew the value, and we went and fixed anything that otherwise be a hiccup for the person who was putting money on the table. I recommend the same thing with the business.
Very good point. So as soon as possible, getting into a business, any type of business, whether it be a franchise or your own personal business, doesn't make any difference. Get a hold of Brian. Check out Brian's book, Bullied by the Bank. You can see where to get a hold of him right up there, theexitguy.com. Any other way to get a hold of you, Brian? How would you like people to reach out to you?
My cell phone's always the best way to reach out to me, if I may. That's 954-557-3400, 954-557-3400. And Greg, if I can share one thought with you in closing here, particularly as the franchise maven, your space is very interesting to me. And I've begun to have conversations with franchisors who are trying to help their franchisees who are effectively investors. So if I invite you into my, portfolio, we help you along, we train you, we want you to be successful. But to have a plan from the franchisor that's going to give you confidence that when you seek to exit, you're going to do so successfully. And so I'm having conversations with franchisors about sponsoring training where I can deploy the training evenly across their portfolio so that you create a level of consistency as to value in measurement and best practices, so as to elevate all of these businesses, because now you have something to which point to point as your comp, your comparable across the country. So that's being very well received as well. So just a last thought.
That is a perfect thought. Definitely franchisors could use that. I do a lot of franchise resales, and having everybody consistent across the board there within a franchise system, it just helps out the whole franchise system, each individual franchisee, and it shows a lot better for the franchisor. So that is a perfect thought. I love it. That's good. Brian, thank you very much for your time today. I really do appreciate it. Reach out to Brian if you have any questions at all. If we're working together and you want an introduction to Brian, just let me know and I'll introduce you to Brian, and he'll go over, I always ask you when we begin with, not only what is it he's trying to accomplish, but what's your exit strategy. So Brian will help us out with that. Brian, again, thank you for your time.
Likewise, Greg, thank you. This was a pleasure. I appreciate you having me.